The next speaker, Fraser Brown, with whom we've all worked, in fact, as conference interpreters, in particular during COP26. So Fraser's going to give us an insight into translation and interpreting jobs from the perspective of the employer or the agency, and the one in question, represented by Fraser today, is Global Languages, a Glasgow-based agency. So Roxanne, Rebecca, thank you so much for this detailed insight, and hopefully see you very soon on a job or at a networking event. And Roxanne, see you very shortly. Bye. Fraser, the floor is all yours. Oh, you're muted. Perfect, that's you on.
Okay, can you all hear me all right? Brilliant. Okay, so hello, my name's Fraser. I work for Global Language Services. As was just mentioned, I am a project manager there, and I work in our translations department, which deals kind of more with like written stuff or transcripts. I'll try not to go over anything which Elena's already covered as much as possible. So our agency is focused on kind of different services. We tend to deal more with kind of public sector stuff, some commercial stuff, so things like providing interpreters or translations for businesses, marketing purposes, verification of medical products for touristic endeavours sometimes as well. I think a few of you here today have undertaken some work in Glasgow and Edinburgh for us on that. And also public sector stuff, as I was saying, so things like interpreting for court appearances or medical appointments or at police interviews or for social work appointments. So all the kind of boring background stuff of society that you don't always know what's going on, but is usually there as well. And also for things such as interviews with the Home Office for immigration purposes, legal hearings for family matters, or obviously other kind of business legal things that are going on. So as I said, I'm a project manager in the translations department, and I mostly deal with written translation day to day. So I've come to appreciate the way our agency works its project managers is slightly different to how other agencies do. But my role personally is that I will oversee a project from a client getting in touch with us to ask for something to be done to the delivery to the client. I think that might be a little bit unusual, and I'm sure if someone else wants to correct me on that, they absolutely can. Other places may have sales managers who are at the front of house and will deal with clients, and there may be other sort of project team leads and stuff in between places, but our projects tend to be of a size that it can be managed start to end by one person. So I was asked to sort of talk about what we look for as an agency in terms of professional interpreters and translators. I think that the kind of first thing we generally look for is a qualification of some kind where possible. This isn't always possible. There are some languages out there which don't have formal qualifications available because they're not very widely spoken, or there's been really horrendous circumstances in particular places which have prevented them having normal educational programs happening. So in cases like that, we would be kind of looking for experience or other education which maybe sort of is in a different field. So for instance, if there is a language from the country Eritrea called Tigrinya, there are not many degree level programs in Tigrinya and English that run throughout the world, but we would maybe speak with linguists who have Masters of Science in Pharmacology that they've completed at an English speaking university, and we would take that as a sort of a basis for them maybe being proficient in the language or a subject matter over a particular translation-based qualification where possible. But other qualifications we might look for interpreters outside of what you might do at university would be the Diploma in Public Service Interpreting, which is sometimes known as the DPSI, or the Diploma in Translation, sometimes also known as the DipTrans. These are accredited other qualifications from the Chartered Institute of Linguists, which is kind of just a good benchmark. But again, these aren't always available in every language pair, so depending on what you're doing, apologies for that. How far along did I get for you?
You were mentioning the different qualifications and also the lack of qualifications for some language pairs.
Yeah, so if your language pair doesn't have a qualification at degree level or DipTrans or DPSI level, other qualifications in other subject areas might be applicable and useful for agencies to look at instead. So from our perspective, kind of one of the key things we like to look for in a linguist is their professionality. So alongside their qualifications, we are looking for someone who has a good attitude and is nice to work with. So that comes from a kind of a fine balance of being confident, but not overly assertive. We find sometimes people are too quick to put themselves forward for things. And as Rebecca was saying earlier, definitely don't oversell yourself, but equally don't undersell yourself. You might be starting out, and agencies, if they're a good agency, hopefully, and they have an understanding team on the other end, will understand that you might be at the start of your career and you don't feel 100% confident with something, but you're willing to give it a try if they're willing to try and support you in doing that. And we have had quite a number of successes with sort of starting out linguists and getting them to be more confident in their own capabilities and moving them forward. So definitely don't be afraid to get started. Maybe don't accept something that's 10,000 words long for your very first assignment. Maybe look for something a little bit shorter, but definitely don't be afraid to get started. It's never as scary as you think it is, and there are so many resources out there for so many things. Unless it's a very, very particular technical or medical translation, the chances are you probably will be able to find resources to help you work on things, and you'll learn lots of stuff about interesting topics as you go as well, because you as the translator also have to become a bit of an expert in some of these things as you translate them. The other important thing for us with linguists is their ability to take on feedback and be collaborative. So for an interpreter, that might be taking on feedback about showing up at a job on time or a little bit earlier, or maybe being a little bit more prepared if they weren't prepared enough, or it might be about giving a client more time to talk if they feel that they were maybe interrupted a little bit or whatever. Usually that's not the case. Interpreting, because of its nature, is more kind of live, and there's less opportunity for there to be kind of instances of stuff like that. So really it is about being friendly, polite, on time, and making everybody feel at ease and letting them have their time to talk as much as possible. With translation, however, because it is a kind of a static piece that you produce at the end of the work, there's more opportunity for you to have feedback from a peer, particularly about the quality of your work. And it's important that you feel confident in defending choices that you've made in a translation, but it's also important that you can take on board constructive criticism from your peers, because I think, as has kind of been touched on already, your network and your collaboration with other linguists is so important, and feedback on translating and how that works is always really important as well, because language is so subjective for everybody. You might have someone who has more experience in a field and might say this would be better said this way, really, or you might have someone who tells you something completely wrong, and you've got to be prepared to sort of rebut what they say and back it up with a good reason. So for us as project managers in the agency, it's important for us to be able to work with a linguist who can do that in a professional manner. Provide feedback for other people that's constructive and not destructive and puts them off ever translating for us again, but also can take on board constructive feedback and not be too precious about their work. I'm just going through my bullet points here. So as Rebecca touched on earlier, you probably might not have very much luck if you just send out CVs to agencies. Agencies are at the kind of end of the day, they're looking at the bottom line and what their margin is on a project, and in my experience they probably don't have a dedicated person who will be looking to recruit linguists. It will be a kind of a, we need this language pairing for this project, let's find someone, or we'll work with someone who we already know and we've had cross-reviewed by peers and know to be good linguists. You might want to call into a language service provider to register with them. That has happened and it has resulted in some good working relationships for us, but you need to remember that the person you're calling might not have the time in their day to be on the phone to you for 20 minutes to discuss your qualifications. So definitely if you're doing that, I think the best thing to do is to have a clear online profile on LinkedIn, the ITI, the Chartered Institute of Linguists, possibly the ATA, which is the American Translators Association as well, if you're working in an English language pair. Other websites that we've come across and use quite regularly are Translators Cafe and also Proz. Proz is one of the kind of more semi-professional ones for linguists, and we find quite a lot of people through there. So definitely have a good profile there. Keep your CVs short and sweet. Most agencies will probably not be interested in your family or marital status, so you don't need to tell them stuff like that. They want to know what your qualifications are, how long you've been doing it, what your experience is, and the number of words you can process per day, or if you're an interpreter, how mobile you are, do you have your own car, what are you set up with technology-wise to be able to attend remote things, what kind of software are you comfortable using, and what your areas of expertise already are. For translation, for both actually, we'd also really be interested to see on your CV what your rates are, or some sort of rates are negotiable line, and a rough indication. In my own personal experience, I'm happy to negotiate with a linguist who is easy to work with on their rates. If someone is more challenging to work with in a positive manner, there's less inclination for us to negotiate with them and make accommodations for them. And as Rebecca said as well, word of mouth is definitely very important. I know that both Rebecca and Roxanne came to us through word of mouth and have gone on to take on other work because of their performance, particularly at COP26. And I think, oh yes, so the only other thing which I was going to point out was your stamina, and this maybe touches a bit on the question which was asked a bit earlier. Thinking back to COP26 a couple of years ago, I was there every day as front of house for our agency to deal with clients and also try and help interpreters to get to their appointments on time. The site was quite big. It took a good 15 minutes to walk from one end to the other, and that was after you'd got through all the security gates and everything at the event. So definitely, if you're going to a job of that nature, please do give yourself lots of time to get there in good time, and come and say hello to the agency if they're there, because it's really nice to put a face to a name, especially if you've not had a chance to do that before. But events like that, they are intense. There's a lot of people. They're noisy, they're fast-paced, there's lots of locations, there's lots of information. The technology might not work on the day, or the tech team might link in to the wrong event to interpret. Lots of things could happen, so it's all about being positive and professional and resilient during those situations. But yeah, if you do find that those kind of situations are stressful for you, you might find that you maybe want to advertise yourself as only doing remote or over the phone or one-to-one face-to-face interpreting, and just definitely don't be afraid to draw a hard line in the sand on what you will and won't do. I think that makes things a lot easier for agencies. I appreciate I've wasted a lot of time by disconnecting inadvertently, so I will wrap myself up there. If you do have any questions, please send them forth and I will do my best to answer them for you.
You've actually just answered one of the questions that was in the chat as to whether it would be detrimental to turn down an assignment because you know that it's going to be too challenging or it's not something that you could do well. And I think that it's a clear no. It's best not to take on an assignment and mess it up. And you're not going to burn your bridges if you decline professionally by saying, I'm sorry, this is not my area of expertise. Am I correct?
Yeah. If you come back to, well, if you were to come back to me and say, I'm sorry, this just isn't in my wheelhouse, I wouldn't want to make a mess of it. That's fine by me. I would assign it to someone else who advertises themselves as being able to do that, and no ill feelings after that.
And quick last question, one regarding languages, language needs. People were asking about whether Global Languages, for instance, tackles assignments with BSL or Ukrainian, and if there's need for these languages in Scotland.
Massive need for Ukrainian. Since the war started last year, our demand for Ukrainian translation alone has increased exponentially. We've had to recruit at least 7 new translators, which, just to kind of give you an idea of how much that might be, we would estimate they could do about 2,000 words per working day. So we were looking to increase our capacity from maybe about 4,000 to closer to 20,000 words per day to meet the demands for mostly just Scotland alone. Interpreters as well. I'm aware that a lot of them have been working on the ships to help people with medical things and getting set up with housing and setting up their new lives for however long it's going to be in the UK. Other languages I think I would highlight as being important, particularly in Scotland, would be Urdu, Polish, Lithuanian, to a lesser extent Romanian. Arabic is very important, obviously with Syrian refugees who came a number of years ago, and in that same vein, Pashto and Dari are also quite popular as well with the Afghan refugees who came after the Taliban took over in Afghanistan. I'm just trying to think. Chinese, both simplified and traditional, or Mandarin and Cantonese are always popular. Realistically, if you go out in the street and have a look around and listen to all the languages that you can hear, that should give you a good idea of what is required. I would say that for the Western European languages, there is a lesser demand, but it is still there. And obviously for things like Portuguese, Spanish and French, these might be the languages spoken by persons who came from former colonies in Africa or further afield. So those languages are still definitely in demand, but to a lesser extent for us.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Fraser.